Hi there and welcome to this clip. This is my first almost live stream. I have 306 subscribers to my channel. That's about 305 more than I was hoping to get. But you need at least 1,000 subscribers to a live stream on YouTube. Perhaps it's just as well that I'm not completely live, because then I can edit out all my tongue crawling and stuff, because I'm not very good in English, but I try to use this channel as a means to practice my oral English, as well as communicate my ideas. And well, in this case I'm going to share a lot of my favorite quotes regarding the application of Pumse and training of Pumse. And like I always do, if you read my blog or have seen my other videos, I will also go back in history. So the quotes I'm going to share is not just Taekwondo quotes, but it's also karate quotes, because of our karate roots. And our Pumse especially is rooted within karate, the way we train it and the way they're put together, and the techniques which build up the various Pumse are also very karate influenced. So to set everything off at once, I'm going to read a quote from the Kukiwon textbook, because I practice Kukiwon Taekwondo, and reading the Kukiwon textbook is one way of finding out if what you are training or trying to achieve is within the Kukiwon Taekwondo system. And one of the criticism against Pumse, practical Pumse applications, is that it's not rooted within Taekwondo, it's a karate thing. So the first quote is from the part that is entitled Training of Pumse. So on page 306 Kukiwon textbook from 2006, you have 5 steps of training of Pumse, and the first one is pattern. The first step of training Pumse is to learn the pattern. Concentration of spirit, eyes, angles of movement must be emphasized in addition to the accuracy of actions. So the first step is very much about the performance of Pumse, learning the movements and the angles of movements, where you turn, etc. The second step is significance. In the next step, the emphasis must be laid on the balance, strength, weakness, low or high speed, respiration and Pumse line. The significance of movements, connection of pums, and the complete Pumse must be learned correctly. So both the first and the second step of the training of Pumse, as outlined by the Kukiwon textbook, is about the performance and training of the complete Pumse. The first one is very the overall, the gross movements of Pumse, the angles where you turn, and in step 2 you get the more fine-tuning, the respiration, how you breathe, slow or fast movements, etc. Now, any dojang in the world where they practice Pumse, you will get these 2 steps. The third one, practical use. One must adapt what he has learned to his practical use, finding out the practicability. So in step 3, it says right there in the Kukiwon textbook that you need to find the practical applications of Pumse. That's the third step. Now, most mainstream dojangs today practice Pumse as a performance sport, or moving meditation, or for health benefits. but step 3 in the Kokuon Taekwondo system is to find out the practical usage of the techniques, the practical applications. Step 4, self-style. One must evaluate his findings about the effectiveness of what he has learned, comparing with his or her bodily structure, speed, strength, impulsive power, point of emphasis in training, etc., and moderate the techniques into his own style. So here you have learned the Pumse in great detail, step 1 and 2. You have found out the practical applications of the Pumse movements, and in step 4 you adapt what you find into your own style. Now the Pumse have very concrete, specific examples. So there might be a throw or a joint lock or something in the Pumse that might fit some, but not all. So here you can vary and adapt to what fits you. So someone very long and thin might choose other throws and joint locks compared to someone who is shorter and more sturdy, more stocky. For instance, some might orient themselves much more into grappling than others because of their mindset. Some might enjoy punching more than kicking, etc. Some might be more get in there and do some damage and get out. Some might want to get the opponents into a greater distance and then pick them off. So there's different kind of fighters out there, the different kind of mindsets and bodily structures. So step 4 is about adapting the Pumse applications. You pick and choose. And step 5, completion. One achieves a synthetic accomplishment of Pumse training by mastering the art of Taekwondo techniques, including Taekwondo spirits. So the first set of kata or hyong, often introduced into karate training after 1905, is the Pinan or Haiyan kata or Pyongan hyong. They were practiced in Taekwondo as well until the 1970s, and they explain the name safe from harm or peace and tranquility because once you have mastered those forms you have learned how to defend yourself. So back to the applications, and here the Taekwondo spirit is that you get more calm because you're safe in your own skills. So I just thought that the training of Pumse as outlined in the Kokuon textbook is very interesting, but often very overlooked. And in the book as well, it's just these 5 steps, 5 points. There's no elaboration on how to find the practical applications. You get the Pumse and then you get 1 or 2 or 3 selected techniques that they give applications for. And to be frank, those applications are often very basic or the semi-traditional 1940s block kick punch paradigm of applications. Now, if we step back into history, I have a 10-minute clip if you want to get the history in a nutshell. You will already know that Gichin Funakoshi is a very important karate master in Taekwondo history because he taught many Kwan founders. And here's a quote from him on hyong or kata or Pumse. Once a form has been learned, it must be practiced repeatedly until it can be applied in an emergency. For knowledge of just the sequence of a form in karate is useless. So this again stresses that the practical application of the form is what you need to master, not just the form itself. learning just the movements of the form, the performance or performance sport of the form in itself is useless, he says. And it also is a favorite quote for me because it sets the context of the forms. The forms are to be learned so that it can be applied in an emergency. So we're talking self-defense. We're not talking about sports, we're not talking about dueling, we're talking about an emergency. So context is very important when you try to find the practical applications. There's another quote from Funakoshi which I enjoy. You may train for a long time, but if you merely move your hands and feet and jump up and down like a puppet, learning karate is not very different from learning a dance. You will never have reached the heart of the matter. You will have failed to grasp the quintessence of karate. So learning pumse as a performance sport only, not giving a single thought about practical application, or even more important, to practice these practical applications, is not very different to learning how to dance. And I couldn't agree more. So we're stepping through history again, jumping a little back and forth. This is from Grandmaster Lee Kyo-hyung, or Lee Kyo-hyung, who wrote a book called What is Taekwondo Pumse, which is a very good book. He has a part which is called Pumse Training Purpose. And he also has several steps or points. Point 1. Pumse training primarily aims to learn the face-to-face fighting arts for an actual field to protect oneself in an emergency. So straight out of the bat you get the important context of Pumse. So this is not a karate thing, this is also very much a Taekwondo thing. This book was published in 2010, I believe. What is Taekwondo Pumse? And it's a Taekwondo grandmaster who wrote the book. It's not a karate quote, but it echoes very closely the words of Funakoshi. And again, in the very next point, Pumse training is one way to learn face-to-face fighting arts for an actual field. I believe it's Silchon that he has in the Korean part of the book. It's written both in Korean and English in the same book. I'll have to recheck that. But Silchon means real life, reality. So we're talking about learning to apply something in reality, not sport again. It's in the real world. It primarily aims to apply one's learned techniques immediately to the actual field, reality, by repeating in advance countless attack and block techniques. And in step 3, it's very important to understand exactly technical contents about how to make a defense and try attack back against opponents, and characteristics, function and methods of each movement. So again, you see that the application of the movements is very important, not just the performance of the movements. The performance of Pumse is just the tip of the iceberg. You have so much more depth underneath the surface, and that's what all of these quotes are aiming at. He also adds in point 4, apart from face-to-face fighting in Pumse training, it has been considered as physical training for good health in recent years. So the health benefits is not overlooked in Taekwondo, but here it comes as an afterthought, because the primary goal of Pumse training is to learn how to apply it in the actual field or in reality. The next quote is another one of Gichin Funakoshi. He wrote a lot, and he also taught a lot of the different Kwan founders. So obviously I read all of his books in great detail to learn how Taekwondo evolved over the years and where we started. One technique that is often overlooked is the Dankinun Son, or the hand that goes back to the hip, which is heavily featured in the Pumse movements. Now, Dankinun Son, or the pulling hand, is called Hikite in Japanese, and Funakoshi describes how to use it. This is from his 1920s book on karate. The true meaning of the hikite, or pulling hand, is to grab the opponent's attacking hand and pull it in whilst twisting it as much as possible, so that his body is forced to lean against the defender. Gichin Funakoshi. So you're grabbing something and you pull it back while you attack him. And once you get that key to the Pumse movements, that the hand that goes back to the hip is most often pulling something, a whole new world opens up immediately to the practical applications. And a very good modern example of this employed in punching especially is in ice hockey. They're on unstable ground, and they have to stay upright and have to keep the person in place so they don't just slide away. So what you often see is that they use one hand to secure and grab the opponent, pulling him in while punching. So hockey punching has very much overlap into the practical application of Pumse in many ways. Another karate pioneer who was he taught karate in the 1920s, 30s and 40s in Japan was Choki Motobu. Now he has no link back or forward to Taekwondo, at least as I'm aware of, but he was very interested in the practical application of karate, and he used kata or hyong, Pumse, as a method to transmit his teachings, and then especially Cholgi Hyong or Naihanchi. So if you're interested on his thoughts about how to apply a form or the role of a form in martial arts, you should just read his books. He has two. So this is from Choki Motobu. All kata use the so-called postures, or all Pumse use the so-called pum, if you want the Korean terms. In fact, there are many kinds of postures and many kinds of kata, or hyong Pumse. While learning these postures should not be totally ignored, we must be careful not to overlook that they are just forms or templates of sorts. It is the function of their application which needs to be mastered. So the first two steps in Pumse training as outlined in the Kokyuwon textbook is to learn the Pumse, the performance of the Pumse in great detail. But step 3 and onwards is all about mastering the applications of the Pumse, finding them and adapting them and making your own style. And this is very closely echoed by the earlier teachings of the karate masters. So there's a transmission here, transmission of knowledge going forwards well into Taekwondo. And the next one is a long one. It has to do with the angles of the Pumse and kata. Obviously kata because it's a karate quote. because very often you see that people think that because you're turning, it means that you're turning to facing a new opponent every time. Now, you don't have to scrutinize very much to find whole sequences of pumse that becomes idiotic if you think about them as small plays or scripts for complete fights. So the turns are not about facing a new opponent, but I'm going to read the lengthy quote here from Kenwa Mobuni, and he taught at least one Kwan founder, the Yun Kwe Byung, who reopened Yun Mo Kwan into Jido Kwan. So we have a direct link into Taekwondo from the Kenwa Mobuni. This is from Kobo Kenpo Karate Do Nyomyon by Kenwa Mobuni, as translated by Joe Swift. And I apologize in advance because it's a lengthy quote, but it's a very important one. The meaning of the directions in kata or pumse is not well understood, and frequently mistakes are made in the interpretation of kata movements. In extreme cases, it's sometimes heard that this kata moves in 8 directions, so it's designed for fighting 8 opponents or some such nonsense. I would like to specifically address this issue now. Looking at the enbusen for Pinnan Nidan, enbusen means the movement lines, one can see that karate, kata move in all directions, forward and back, left and right. When interpreting kata, one must not get too caught up in these directions. For example, do not fall into the trap of thinking that just because a kata, or pumse, begins to the left, that the opponent is always attacking from the left. There are 2 ways of looking at this. 1, the kata is defending against an attack from the left. 2, angle to the left against a frontal attack. At first glance, both of these look alright. However, looking at only number 1, the meaning of the kata becomes narrow, and the kata, which in reality must be applied freely in any situation, becomes awfully meager in its application. Looking at an actual example, the 5 Pinnan kata all start to the left and then repeat the same series of techniques to the right. Looking at interpretation 1, the opponent must always attack from the left. While fighting that opponent, another opponent comes from behind, so the defender turns to fight that opponent. You know, you turn to the left, you block, you punch, someone attacks you from behind, you turn 180 degrees, you block and punch. This type of interpretation is highly unreasonable. Looking at interpretation number 2, however, the 5 Pinnan kata show us that against an attack from the front, we can evade either left or right to put ourselves in the most advantageous position to defend ourselves. So one is very unrealistic, that you sense someone attacking you from behind, so you turn 180 degrees to defend yourself, while the other way is to show that you can shift or evade from a frontal attack to the left or to the right. And when you don't have an opponent, you are doing the forms yourself alone, you need to be able to record the angles. And the only thing that you have to record the angles when you're alone is that you turn. If there was 2-man kata or 2-man pumse, 2 people doing it together against each other, one attacker, one defender, you could obviously just use the other person to record the angles, but you're doing them alone. So the way that they recorded the angles is to turn. That doesn't mean that all turns is to show you the angle to evade from a frontal attack. usually when you're about the halfway point, you turn to get back to the starting point, and that is done to keep the forms close, so you don't use up all the space. Ian Abernethy said something funny, like it's the instructor couldn't afford a bigger dojo or training hall turn. There's another quote from Kenwa Mobuni, which I also found very important. If practiced properly, 2 or 3 kata will suffice as your kata. All the others can just be studied as sources of additional knowledge. And the reason why I chose to include this in this video is because when interpreting Pumse, it's good to have a few that you go very in-depth on. But in the modern sense, you learn so many Pumse. For black belt, it's not unusual to learn 9. And in the old days, you would have learned 1 or at most 3, 5 to be a master. And that would be a lifetime of study. But today, you learn 1 Pumse every 6 months until you get to the black belt, if you're a quick study. So again, if practiced properly, 2 or 3 kata will suffice as your kata. All the others can be studied as sources of additional knowledge. There's another advantage to having a broad base of forms, and that is, like I previously said, the forms show very specific solutions or concrete examples. So when you have a lot of different forms which are based on the same principles, in Norway you say you get it with a teaspoon. You get a lot of different examples utilizing the same basic principles, the combative principles. So if one principle is not understood by that one application, one example, you get additional examples until you internalize the principle. The principle is what is important here, not the specific techniques. And Gichin Funakoshi said something along the same lines. A student well versed in even one technique will naturally see corresponding points in other techniques. A upper level punch, a lower level punch, a front punch and a reverse punch are all essentially the same. Looking over the 30-odd kata, he should be able to see that they are essentially variations on just a handful. Again, looking at the underlying principles, you have very few underlying combative principles, which are expressed in many different ways, but they're all built upon the same principles. The last quote I'm going to share at this time is from Shoshin Nagamine. I'm very sorry if I mispronounced that name. The reason I like this quote is because in most Pumse and Karate Kata, Hyong, or martial arts forms, you often step forward to do the techniques, while in many sport paradigms you will step back to maintain the combative distance. So this quote is about the secret to be able to defend yourself against someone stronger, taller, bigger. The secret was that when a small man faces an opponent, he must not take backward steps to evade blows or kicks. Instead, he should take forward steps or side steps so that he can take the offensive right after defending himself. Lawrence Kane, I believe, said something along the lines that stepping forward allows you to steal time. You cut off the attack before it has reached full momentum. So stepping forward, you don't have to be that fast to counter, because you smash into the attack before it's really gotten off. And this is a very traditional way of applying the pumse or kata or the martial arts, to step either directly forward or to the sides forward. Because then you can both defend and get on the offense right away. Now, this is obviously not a live stream. If you want to see me do a live stream, you need to subscribe to my channel, because I need at least 1,000 subscribers before I can do that with a mobile phone, which is the only camera I have at the moment. But the next best thing that you can do is to leave a comment below if there's anything that you want to, if you want to elaborate on any of the comments or quotes, or if there's something that you want me to elaborate on a future video. If I get enough comments, I can use those comments to make another video, a response video, which would also be very fun. So please subscribe to my channel, and if you think someone else out there would enjoy reading or listening to these quotes, don't hesitate to share the video with your friends. So that's all. I hope you all have a good training, and that your studies goes well, even in these coronavirus times.